Today's topic, securing your virtual desktop environment, will be presented by Erwin Vollering, GlassHouse's Virtualization Service Director. Erwin has designed and implemented several large enterprise projects for customers around the world, leveraging technologies such as server virtualization, presentation virtualization, application virtualization, and more recently, desktop virtualization. Mark Sahanuk, our security expert, will also be on call to help answer any security-related questions. Just a few housekeeping notes. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Please use the questions pane to do so. We will be happy to email this presentation to you at the end of the call. And if you have questions after the webcast, please email them to me. I'll make that email available to you. And I will ensure that Erwin and Mark follow up with you. So if you're ready, everyone, Erwin Vollering.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We'll start today with the current state of desktop virtualization, and talk a little bit about where we are, what today's drivers are, and what the adoption rate is. Then we'll move on to the actual securing your environment, which is split up into the secure access area and workspace security. Later on, we'll talk about some other considerations that we might have when securing your environment, and we'll end with a Q&A. So why are customers deploying desktop virtualization at the moment? A big driver, and that's one of the reasons why we're having this webcast today, is data protection, data security, and compliance. With desktop virtualization, data is almost always automatically centralized, which makes it easier to secure and protect, and definitely compliance to the different regulations that are out there. Another big aspect, another big driver is desktop management efficiencies. Because of the centralization of the desktop, it's easier, manageable, it's easier to update, it's easier to deploy patches and new applications, or it's easier to even create desktops and assign users to those desktops. Mobility is another big driver, hence the secure aspect. Excuse me, the secure access aspect. Windows 7, new desktop OS, a lot of changes, especially in terms of application compatibility. It's absolutely a big driver that we see from customers. And last but not least, I guess one of the buzzwords of the year is the bring your own device, bring your own computer to work strategy, where users are allowed to bring or use whatever device they have to access the environment, which is causing to be, I'd almost say, a major headache to security teams. Today's implementations are primarily focused around large financials, insurance companies, healthcare. It really is about technical use cases, such as the call centers and the task workers, where it's easy to group users with a basic application set that's accessible over VDI or terminal server environments. It's changing, however. We definitely see, as technology improves, we definitely see a shift from just the technical solutions to a more strategical demand. But as the numbers on the screen show, we're not there yet. 60% of enterprises are considering desktop virtualization. However, it only has a penetration rate of just 1%. So how do you measure success in a VDI implementation? It's about a triage between the best user experience, feature-rich desktop, and the lowest price point. The reason why I have this slide on the screen at the moment is because this completely ties back into the security aspect, where the best user experience may not always be the most secure environment. And the same thing for the lowest price point and the feature-rich desktop. So in today's talk, we'll talk a little bit about what the implications are on on those success criteria and what aspects there are while considering the VDI implementation. So the secure access topic, we definitely see the landscape changing due to consumerization, and more so because of the so-called untrusted devices, which are basically the devices that people or that are not managed by the IT department. So untrusted devices can be iPad, iPhones, Android devices, or netbooks, or even TVs with built-in web browsers. There are many devices out there nowadays that are basically untrusted, and more users are accessing or are demanding access to the corporate environment from those devices. This poses a whole new challenge to security and securing your environment. So in a way, it's challenging. In another way, it's also an enabler, especially for VDI, because it definitely opens up new opportunities for secure access. By nature, it's easy to access remotely and to secure the initial access. So because of technically it's just one protocol traversing a firewall, for example, it's easily accessible from different types of networks, or whether you are in a hotel room or on a 3G connection. It doesn't really matter. Because data is centralized, it doesn't really matter what device you're using to access the environment. The data is central anyway, so you won't have a situation where you left something on the desktop of your workstation at the office that you need the access from home. It's all centrally stored, so big opportunity there. And device scans, which allow the security infrastructure to see what type of device is actually accessing the environment, and base the access on criteria that you set for your security policy. For example, and I will circle back to this later on, but endpoint analysis scans can look at devices, see what type of virus scanner is running on there, or whatever patch level or client version, and you can base your access level on what's on that device. So if a user is accessing your environment with a corporate company-issued laptop, users are probably allowed to save documents locally and print and do cut and paste with local applications. If you're accessing an environment from your iPad or some untrusted device that you'd rather not have secure or confidential data on, endpoint analysis types of technologies will help you enforce your security policies. The protocol support is a big differentiator for determining what type of access device you'll need and whatever functionality you want to offer your customers. The client that is needed to connect back to the environment and the availability of that client on different platforms, and therefore the protocol that's supported will definitely point you into a direction and maybe even a VDI broker choice. So that's definitely something to consider and look at when designing your environment. Security policies tend to have some type of authentication policy in place. Really, it doesn't change much when going from a traditional environment to a VDI environment. If you were using a smart card or two-factor authentication, you can still use it. It's not recommended to use the static passwords to access any environment, but that really hasn't changed much from the traditional VPN days, to accessing your environment over an SSL tunnel, for example, directly to the virtual desktops. Because of the way things change in a VDI environment or in a virtual desktop environment, the network segmentation around the location of your desktops also will change slightly. One common mistake that I keep hearing over and over again is that since your virtual desktops are running on a hypervisor platform that is running in your data center, all your virtual desktops are more or less in that same secure network. However, your traditional desktops, they're not. They're in a client network, which has a completely different security level and security policy level than your data center has. So please move the virtual desktops away from the data center network, the secure data center network, into a separate segment, and base those segments on use cases. I'll circle back to this later on, but determine use cases based on user profiles. Not all users are the same. So administrative users have different access profiles than traders or executives or the financial people. So it could very well be that your financial workstations have to be in a more secure network segment than the administrative people or the call center people. And if that's not possible because of limitations in the infrastructure or anything, make sure that the most secure environment is always the one that wins. So if you have call center people and financial people, make sure that the network policy for those desktops, for all those desktops, is based on the financials, which is most likely to have the most restrictive network policy set up. Potential pitfalls while determining your secure access policy is most likely that the first one is that the remote access policy is out of date. It's perhaps still based on a company-issued workstation that will access your environment through traditional IPsec VPN. That's no longer the case. With the traditional IPsec VPN, it was more or less easier to see what your users were doing because the tunnel was terminated at the perimeter of your network. From there on, users access whatever resources they can access based on ACLs or something that has been set up. That's no longer the case. With VDI, users connect back to a virtual desktop that's in the data center, and from that point on, they're accessing resources. However, those desktops are shared with internal people, so it's not always clear whether a user that's connecting is coming from the outside or from the inside or whatever location. And that's why it's important to circle back to the endpoint analysis to make sure that if that's important to your environment, make sure that your access devices support such functionality that you can discriminate based on location or type of device that's accessing your environment. Another common mistake is a misconfiguration that allows data to be saved printed outside of the trusted network. Again, it has the smart access feature where you can tell based on the client device or the location or the network that the user is coming from what type of functionality is available. By default, it can be anything from you're allowed to save anything local and cut and paste and print to you're not allowed to do anything, which basically restricts the user and deteriorates the user experience if we look back to the success criteria of a virtual desktop environment. So these settings should be configured based on user profiles and not the user profiles as we know them from the Windows environment, but definitely the user use cases where we look at a certain type of user and look at the way that user can access the environment from the different types of networks, different scenarios, and base our access policies on those scenarios. One other thing that I just wanted to mention, which is not really a security issue, but bandwidth requirements can exceed protocol capabilities. So it can be a decision factor when choosing your broker. But definitely look at the application set and the protocol capabilities over the different types of networks to see what's available and what will work best in your environment. As I said before, the visibility of the virtual world is slightly different from the traditional world where a user has a workstation and from that workstation accesses different resources on the network, or when the user is remote, sets up a VPN and accesses different resources from that VPN. Since the session and therefore all user interaction basically moves from the end device, the endpoint device, into the data center, you most likely will have to look at your security strategy from a different point of view and move those layers from the perimeter to closer to the internal network. Devices that can definitely help with enforcing your policies are data loss prevention devices or intrusion prevention systems, where especially the DLP devices can look at traffic patterns and network policies and see if the user is accessing certain types of data from a device on a time of the day that's not allowed to do it. So the user is accessing a Word document from home which has confidential and embargo in it, and it's most likely not allowed to do that at that time of the day or from that device or from that location, and therefore can raise security alert that needs further investigation into that matter. So those devices definitely help you enforce your security policy and give you more insight into user activity, which allows you to audit user activity and, more importantly, to do forensic analysis when in hindsight data has leaked and something did happen and you need to find out what happened, why it happened, and make sure that it won't happen again. And not so much on the network level, but I want to stress it a little bit, is the malware detection on a VDI instance. Sometimes it's kind of frowned upon, where it does take up a lot of resources, and although the slide does say on the VDI instance, it doesn't really matter if it's on the VDI instance or somewhere in the cloud or on another level, but make sure that there is malware detection on your environment active, and that it's up to date, and that it actually is supported by VDI, or that it actually supports VDI environments. There are different vendors that have VDI compliant technologies out there. So you won't have to tweak it, or the performance at least is tested and specifically made for virtual environments. One thing that's not applicable to all environments, but definitely something that is evolving and needs further investigation, are the regulatory considerations. PCI, for example, if it is applicable to you, it is including virtualization in the next version. The Cloud Security Alliance is coming up with the guidance to help you design a secure virtual environment. There are definitely a couple of industry-specific benchmarks out there. So please look into the compliance issues and regulatory considerations that may be applicable to your environment. So let's move to the second part of our presentation, which is workspace security. Workspace is basically the environment where users do their productive daily operations, so where they start SAP or Office or whatever they do on a daily basis. It can be through terminal services, it can be VDI, or it can be blade PCs, it can even be the traditional PC. So it's not necessarily a VDI thing, or it's not necessarily a terminal services thing. It doesn't really matter where it is. It's the workspace, which also has to be secured. The workspace, or at least the security on the workspace, should be based on user profiles. And with user profiles, I mean work use case profiles. So I already discussed this briefly. We found out that it works best if you profile users based on activity, so on applications that they use, on security requirements, on functional requirements, but also on location and time of day and availability. So eventually you'll end up with a decision tree where you can find a place for every user that you have in your environment. And that use case should then tell you what technology to use for that user, whether it be VDI or terminal services or a blade or a traditional PC, but also what policy should be applied to that user. So both group policies or access policies, printing policies, basically anything. So when you do create a new user, or when you are migrating your users, it's easier to profile your users. It's easier to scale your environment, and it definitely can help you save cost, because when you have a better way of grouping your users onto certain types of machines, you can make more efficient use of that hardware. So you can have more users on a single platform, or if not all of your users require, for example, a certain SLA, a certain uptime, then it's easier when your users are profiled in certain use cases to facilitate that for those users that do need it, without having to do it for all of your users, or because of cost restraints for none of your users. So having said that, the number one thing that I want to get across is that don't make your users a local admin on your virtual desktop. Basically not on any desktop, but historically most companies have done that. However, on the virtual desktop, especially because they are centralized into your data center environment, make sure that users are not allowed to install applications or to disable services or anything like that. It's things that will definitely compromise your security. There's no need for it, especially when you use, for example, application virtualization, where you can decouple your application from the actual operating system. But make sure that users don't need local admin access. And if they do, then it would be another use case where those types of users are isolated into a separate silo where only users that have local admin access exist. Non-persistent desktops are not secure by nature. The non-persistent desktops are, the non-persistent desktops are desktops that basically revert back to the gold image, or to the standard issue desktop once the user logs off. So essentially there are two different types, the persistent and the non-persistent. The persistent is specifically for that user, and if you change settings or something, it will be saved because the desktop will always be there. Basically a personal desktop that is no longer running on your desktop under your desk, but somewhere in the data center. Non-persistent desktops can be shared by a large number of users and are in that perspective, a little bit more efficient since they typically require less disk space and are more easily provisioned to your users. However, a misconception is that they are secure because once the user logs off, it reverts back to the standard image, to the gold image, which is secure, and therefore it doesn't really matter what users do on their desktop. In a way, that's true. However, there's still a period of time where users access the desktop, are active on that desktop, can install anything they want, or install keyloggers or anything that can compromise your environment. So your non-persistent desktop should also be patched and be monitored for malware, and basically should be treated the same as you would treat your persistent desktops. For the workspace security, the easily overlooked quick wins, the low-hanging fruit are local drive access, cut and paste access, the local print access, basically the things that can manage based by what type of device is accessing the environment, what user, what's the time of day, and what application are they accessing. If you really think of these strategies and create policies around that, it's quite easy to secure your environment or to create another barrier for users that do want to create or do want to steal data or do things that they shouldn't be doing without having to invest into third-party software or other barriers. The whitelisting and blacklisting of application is also one of those aspects that may increase your operational expenses a little bit in terms of managing it. However, it can definitely be increase your security dramatically. And again, virus scanners will destroy your performance, but it's a necessary evil. You have to block that malware and all the other junk that will come into your environment if you don't do it at some point. So please include it in the design and in the environment. One thing that I personally like doing is raising the security level by using third-party tooling. Group policies is not truly a third-party tool, but it's included here because it's an efficient way of increasing security without limiting the users too much in their functionality and in their freedom. You know, it's fine to give users their personal background as long as your company policy allows that. However, do they need the run box? That depends. And if you do profile your users correctly, you can even discriminate based on group membership or on user profile. So it doesn't really matter much. However, I mentioned two companies over here that I really like, but there are many others out there that do an excellent job in securing the workspace. There are definitely companies out there that secure your environment without increasing complexity too much. I mean, group policies, especially for large environments where you have a lot of use cases and a lot of different scenarios, can be complicating. And third-party tooling can help you with that. Basically, it can do the same thing and more while creating an environment that's easy to manage. And again, build profiles based on device, access method, and application. I'm guessing it, but it will definitely help you securing your environment, keeping it and maintaining it in the long run. So a short summary, some considerations. Identify your virtualization layers. This definitely helps you determine where you need to, let's say, insert an IDS or some type of network device to scan your traffic patterns, or firewall rules or remote access devices. So make sure that you know where your different layers are. Apply policies at the central systems or at the cloud layer and not the endpoints, especially with the consumerization trend that's going on. You can't manage the endpoints anyway. The only thing you can do is look at the endpoint and know what it is and apply policies to your central systems, to your VDI environment based on those endpoints. It's shifting away from applying policies to the endpoint to applying them at the VDI layer. And it's also about protecting data and not so much the systems. Systems, of course, are important to be protected. However, is what needs to be secure and needs to stay internal if it is specified to be internal. So focus on the data, and the systems will more or less follow automatically. Create a solid gold image. Lock it down with policies. Use third-party applications, whatever you need to do, but make sure that it's still a functional environment for your users, so you don't lock it down too much and restrict users in functionality, which drives down the adoption rate and does not make sense at all. However, make sure that whatever you do makes sense for that environment and that type of users, and definitely incorporate some type of patch management to make sure that it's always up to date, that patches are installed, that application patches are installed, that Windows patches are installed, and your users are working with a secure environment. Decoupling your applications from the operating system using some type of application virtualization is definitely a big help with creating a secure environment. It's easier to update your image when the application is not truly in the image. There are less restriction or less interdependencies, and it's easier to update your applications without impacting your operating system. So it works both ways, and aside from creating a more secure environment, it will definitely increase your time to deploy, flexibility, and it will, at some point in time, and in the near future, I'd say, will definitely allow you to actually your users to provision their own applications if that's the direction that you want to head into. So it has more advantages than just security aspects. For certain user profiles or use cases, client virtualization may make sense. Client virtualization essentially is where you run a type 1 hypervisor on your client, and you can run multiple operating systems simultaneously. So you'll have a personal virtual machine where you do your own stuff in, where you download your BitTorrents and whatever, and a business virtual machine. And you as an administrator can determine what the level of interaction can be between those two systems. The technology is not quite there yet, but it's definitely something that's upcoming and something to be considered. We already talked about network segmentation. It's important to know what your clients are and what they should be doing and what type of segment they should be placed. So it's not a one-size-fits-all environment where everybody's in the same network segment and it's one big place. It's something that needs to be looked into and needs to be tied into the use cases. And last but not least, for the consideration, the user is always the weakest link. It has been like that for years, and it will be like that for many years to come. The keyloggers, social engineering, we passed the other day that there's still users that will give out passwords for chocolate or tea or whatever, and that's something that most likely won't change. But all the things we talked about today are barriers that will make it more difficult for users. So it's it will be too much trouble for them to go through. And even if you have a password or you sniff the password using a keylogger or whatever network piece of software, you won't be able to do much because you thought of other barriers and other locations in your environment, in your infrastructure. So to summarize it, use profiles to create security templates, align your security policies with the type of access. Type of access is changing with the virtual environment, so it's most likely that the security policy needs to be updated accordingly with that. The really important one is that VDI won't solve existing security challenges. Whatever challenges you have will still be there with VDI. The way it will make it easier because your data will be centralized and your access point will be centralized, but it will also make it more complicated because it's introducing different layers of complexity into your environment. So it's a trade-off. However, you will not fix it by introducing VDI. One thing that I personally like to stress a little bit is leverage endpoint analysis and network level protection technologies. There are things that 9 out of 10 times are already present in the devices that you are using or the devices that you're looking at when you're implementing an environment, a virtual environment. So it's just a small step to enable it, and it's a huge leap forward for achieving a more secure environment. And on the same token, don't let a technology bias or a vendor relationship or anything guide your decision when selecting your broker or your access device and your overall security policy. It's about functional requirement and how that translates into your technical requirements and whatever technology suits that best. And I would like to end with the always challenging, educate your users. So as I just said, your users are probably the weakest link. However, make sure that they are aware that they are working with confidential data or that they are working on systems that and with applications and data that's sensitive to your company. And try to raise awareness for what they're doing and what implications their actions may have. With that, I'd like to end my presentation, and I'm open for questions. And Natalia?
So far we have one question. It's, can you define better why non-persistent desktops are not secure by nature? Is this on a special configuration? Non-persistent desktops that are deleted daily would be more secure, I would think.
Well, in that perspective, they are secure, but they are secure at the moment they're deleted. So let's assume that a user logs on to their desktops at 8 a.m. and they install whatever malware at 8:15, and they'll continue to work until 5 p.m. During the day, that machine is still to infect other machines or trying to sniff data or anything like that. So in the end, they're more secure because they are reverted back to your gold image and they are back to, or they are cleaned again. However, during that period of time where it is vulnerable for infection, it could have infected other machines, or it could have sent valuable data, secure data, confidential data to malicious parties. So it's in a way they're more secure, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to patch it, or you have to patch it on a different frequency than your persistent desktops would be patched. I hope that answers your question.
Great. For application virtualization, how do you rate thin app versus AppV versus XenApp?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it comes down to what your requirements are. I personally am a fan of AppV However, TNAP has definitely advantages if you want to virtualize Internet Explorer, although it may not be allowed through the user license agreement. TNAP is able to do it, and it's by nature it's less complex, so it does not have a whole infrastructure behind it, which FV does have. So it really depends. It's kind of difficult to answer over the phone without knowing the specifics of your environment. So I personally, my personal top 3 would be FV, TNAP, and the Citrix virtualization. But again, it can depend on, it completely depends on whatever your requirements are.
Okay. If we don't have any other questions, doesn't look like we do. I wanted to go ahead and thank you so much for joining us for today's webcast. As mentioned at the beginning of this call, we will be emailing you the presentation you saw today shortly. Should you have any additional questions, you can send them to me. You can see my email address up there. And I will ensure Erwin and Mark will follow up with you. And join us next month when GlassHouse will be discussing cloud in the webcast entitled Private and Public Clouds from Business Case to Reality. Have a great rest of your day.